Hello, welcome back to Wyvern Minis. In the previous video I showed you how I assembled these great little dinosaurs and crocodile from the Tamiya model range, the Mesozoic Creatures box set. Really nice little models, go together very easily, and in this video I'm going to show you how I've painted them in a pretty quick, easy and effective style using dry brushing primarily. Now I'm not for 1 minute going to tell you this is how you have to paint models. I'm not really a fan of the YouTube videos that do that and say you're doing it wrong, you must do it this way. All I'm going to do is show you how I've painted them, and I think it's a pretty good method for doing it quickly and effectively, and hopefully there's something you can take from it and adapt into your own painting. So let's get on with it. Okay, I started with a Chaos Black undercoat, spray paint, and wanted to begin with the crocodile, give him a nice pale brown belly to make it look as natural as possible. So I used Carrick Stone, which is actually, this is quite an old pot of paint, so it needed a good shake, but it still works fine. Get it onto the palette there, and for my palette I tend to use this old offcuts of tiles from when we redid our bathrooms. They've got a lot of small ridges on them, so it's really handy for me able to wipe off the paint and make the brush as dry as possible to be able to do the dry brushing. I'm starting off with some stippling here because these models have got texture on them, but they're not very deep. There's not very deep grooves on the texture. It's not very prominent. I've done a lot of dry brushing on other models where they've got a lot more texture. I'll stick a couple of photos of those up in a bit. But I wanted to do this stippling technique to add some variation in the colour, to try and make it as natural as possible, but also to add a little bit of extra texture for the next layers of dry brushing. That's something that Byron at Artist Opus talks about. So check out Artist Opus if you want to learn more about dry brushing techniques, because Byron's the absolute master of it. But I've taken some elements of what he does, but I've tried to simplify it down because I didn't want to spend quite as long as he does on it. I want to do it nice and quickly. So that's the good thing you can do, is you can see what other people are doing and adapt it to your own style and technique. My daughter's helped me out here. She can do this sort of technique quite easily. I could have probably let her do a bit more than I did, but she had a good time. So it's just getting a nice coverage of stippling on, and you get this variation where some places it's on a little bit more opaque and some places a little bit more transparent. You get a little bit of light and dark coming through, and just going up about halfway up the crocodile, so at the top of it you can start doing some green and kind of get a slight natural transition blending from one to the other. I'm just using an old green here, I think it's Warflesh. Same process, exactly the same as with the brown. Just get some of that on the palette, wipe it off on the brush, and then stipple it on the top half. And you just slightly overlap where the brown is, but not too much. And that's how you get a nice kind of transition from one to the other. Make sure you get all over the model. So this crocodile has ended up being entirely kind of light grey-brown underneath and dark green on top. And that's your starting point. You've got the texture from the model itself, plus you've got additional texture from the stippling, which you can then build up extra layers of dry brushing on top of that. And in the interest of time efficiency and trying to get these models all painted up nice and quickly, I'm using the same green here as the base coat for the Hypsilophodon. I decided for this one not to make it two-tone, it's just a single colour all over, which I think is absolutely fine. But you know, if you've got some paint on your palette and you can use it elsewhere, it's quite handy just to use it up. It will save you time in the long run. This is far from batch painting because it's only, what, 5 or 6 models. But still, anything you can do like this does help speed things along. So it's a top tip for you. So I've got the base coats stippled in there now, the nice dark green on the top of the crocodile, the lighter colour underneath, and the Hypsilophodon all completely stippled with dark green. So I'll take a lighter shade of green, another pot here, stick that on the palette, and then get that on my brush, wipe off as much of the paint as I can so it's nice and dry on the brush, and then lightly paint over the top of the model so it will just catch on the prominent bits that are sticking out. So you'll end up with the raised areas being a lighter colour as they're grabbing that paint, and the recesses are still nice and dark from the previous stippling base coat. And that's the principle of dry brushing. Gradually make the tone a bit lighter and brush with a bit of a dry brush or with a bit less pressure, and it catches on more of the raised areas higher up, and then you end up with a nice transition from the deep dark recesses up to the nice bright pointy bits. When you're using a palette, you've got the benefit that you can mix the colours, so you don't have to go for a new pot of paint every time, although there are so many shades of paint colours out there nowadays. You can just use different pots of paint. When it comes to mixing paint, I would say it's an interesting topic of discussion. Obviously, mixing paint is a really useful thing to do, and if you know what you're doing, it's brilliant. It's a bit difficult if you're painting a whole army. If you want it to look consistent and you start mixing your paints, you need to remember the exact recipe you used. Otherwise, you've got the potential for things to look different across the whole army, and you might not want that. You might want a nice bit of consistency, in which case you might be better off doing it straight from the pot or the bottle, or write down what you did for mixing it up. I'm not very good at writing things down like that, but in this case I'm doing a bit of mixing because I don't really care about consistency. If I'm going to paint another crocodile in the future and it's a slightly different shade of green, well, that's great. That's just natural. Different crocodiles look slightly different, and I'm only painting these ones at the moment anyway, so I'm quite happy with that. And all I'm trying to do is trying to get a sort of natural feel to these models, so a nice bit of variation in the colour tone is great. It just adds to the sort of natural look when things are slightly random. But anyway, I digress. This is the basic dry brushing principles here. I'm also using the same green to go over the bracken on the bases, because that's, again, saving time using the same colour on multiple different bits. So moving on to the Parasaurolophus, I decided I wanted this to be a kind of greyish blue sort of colour, so I started with Skaven Blight Dinge, which is a really interesting kind of grey colour. I really like it. So I did exactly the same stippling process. This time decided to stipple the base coat all over, even though I was going to try and get a bit of a transition on the dinosaur itself. So the later dry brushing stages I was going to use to get the transition in there, to get the two tones, rather than doing a different stippling base coat like I did on the crocodile. Again, this is all just different ways you can achieve similar results. Sometimes it's useful doing it this way, sometimes it's useful doing it the other way, and again, certainly with something that's natural like a dinosaur or a crocodile or whatever, varying how you do things across different animals is perfectly valid, because that's what happens in the real world. Not that animals get painted in the real world, I'm just saying a bit of natural variation is interesting, and that's what we're trying to replicate here. I used the Skaven Blight Dinge for the base coat on the rocks on the bases, and the Parasaurolophus I've already done an extra dry brushing coat of blue over the top of the Skaven Blight Dinge, focusing it on the upper half of the body, so the sort of belly and underneath and the inside of the legs and things like that are staying a bit more grey, and the back is going a bit more blue. That's the idea. Getting another lighter blue in here, and I think one of the things with dry brushing is sometimes you can actually go lighter than you think. So sometimes you'll get a colour and it looks like it would be far too light, and it would be far too light if you were just to paint it as a solid colour all over the model. But if you're dry brushing it and it's only catching the very tips of any raised bits, it actually works quite well. So sometimes you do want to go for a colour that seems like it's going to be lighter than you would imagine. You can see that the colour transition on the Parasaurolophus is working quite well. So for him, his belly's actually going to be a bit darker at the moment. I did change it a little bit later on, which you'll see I put a lighter colour on there, but the lighter colour going on top of the darker grey worked really well as a contrast to the sort of increasing blue. So you've got an increase in the blue saturation as you go up to the top of his back, and a decrease in that blue colour down to his belly, which I think's quite nice really, especially for an animal that may well have been wading around in swamps. potentially. And I'm doubling up on the colours once again here by using the same blue colour on the Archaeopteryx feathers. I made sure the brush was a little bit more wet for this one because I wanted a little bit more blue saturation. I wanted to get the Archaeopteryx looking a little bit brighter rather than just catching the edges. So a little bit more paint on the brush and a little bit heavier, just so there's a small amount of darkness in the recesses from the black undercoat, but not too much. And here you'll see I got out a really bright blue colour for that Parasaurolophus. I made sure I used a different brush to put on the palette because I didn't want any chance of too much paint going down into the bristles on the dry brush, because I wanted to make sure it was only catching the real tips of any raised areas. So I used a different brush for that. But again, this looks like it's going to be too bright, this blue, but I thought once it was on, it looked really, really good. You get a real nice kind of patchy effect to the skin, which I think makes it look quite realistic, sort of like a monitor lizard or something. If you look at them, the skin isn't just a flat colour, it's kind of slightly patchy and varies across it, partly because of where the muscles are, how it's moving, all that kind of stuff. So I think this worked out really well. I was debating whether to go for the super bright blue on the Parasaurolophus, but I'm glad I did, because the end result really did what I wanted it to do. I was able to use it on the Archaeopteryx as well, because as I already said, I wanted that to be a bit brighter anyway, so I went a little bit harder on the light blue on the Archaeopteryx. But again, the effects worked really well on those feathers, so I'm very pleased with both of those. Okay, so onto the infant T-Rex, and I decided I'd paint him in a browny red colour. I don't know why, just fancied it. So I started with a quite a light brown colour as a base coat actually. I didn't do quite so much stippling on this one as with the previous models. He's got a fair bit of texture in the back, so I did a bit more conventional dry brushing, a little bit of stippling on the back. Went quite heavy with the brown, maybe a little bit too heavy. And this is, you can wipe it off with your finger, as you just saw me do there. If you go, a bit too hard as I did. But overall, it's just getting quite a nice solid brown down to then build up with the other colours. Later on, the red that I was going to use on his back primarily. But yeah, the texture on this one just meant I didn't feel like it needed quite so much stippling to try and get that in there. In the interest of saving time, I had the brown on the palette, so I used that on the Oviraptor, and I did do some more stippling on this one. I decided I wanted the Oviraptor to be quite a nice kind of bright yellow colour. I feel that if they're running around stealing eggs, as we think they did, then they should look like bright yellow bandits or something. But anyway, again, a brown undercoat for that should work quite nicely and make it quite, hopefully, a fairly natural sort of yellow colour rather than a bright garish one. That was the plan anyway. And as the brown's already there, I thought I'd use that a little bit more because it was quite a nice shade to do a bill on the Parasaurolophus and the little hoofy claw things on that as well. Because duck-billed dinosaurs are sort of thing, having a bill looks quite nice, and the same on the Hypsilophodon had a little beak and claws, and the legs on the Archaeopteryx, and the claws on the old crocodile. So getting those brown colours down, just for starters. So then I went on to doing something slightly odd. Used a flesh tone. I think this is Cadian flesh tone. And I figured that was actually going to be quite a nice highlight colour for the brown, but I think I better leave that for the next video because this one's gone on far longer than I was expecting actually. Sorry about all the rambling, but I'll talk about the flesh tone, how I used that in the third and final instalment of this little video series. And I said I was going to include a couple of pictures of some other dry brushing stuff I've done in the past. So yeah, there's this a couple of owl bears that I've done. You can see here the texture on the owl bears is really deep, really prominent. So they're prime candidates for dry brushing. Don't need to worry about stippling or anything like that. Just dry brush straight on, because there is enough relief there to really make that work really well. And then if you look at this one, this dragon, quite similar to the dinosaurs in many ways. The texture is there, but it's not massively prominent. But it was a really great model to drybrush. I love this model. It was a present from my D&D group for running the sessions for them, which was really appreciated. Venom Thrax, the green dragon. And finally, this is another dinosaur. So I painted this one for top of my wedding cake when I got married, and this was the instead of having a normal sort of play setting, I decided I had to paint a sort of Jurassic Park style scene for me and my wife to be trying to escape from a T-Rex. So I decided to paint the T-Rex in this Tamiya set quite differently to the way I painted this one here. But again, dry brushing, trying to get different tones in there. It's all the same sort of technique. So I'll just finish this off in the next video, and yeah, hopefully that's been useful. Cheers, bye.